The safety is off. There's a round in the chamber. This is Armed Alabama, an interactive talk show discussing self-defense, product reviews, shooting tips, safety, and more. Your calls, comments, and texts welcome at 343-0106. Now, here are your hosts, retired judge and certified NRA instructor Rusty Johnston and certified NRA law enforcement instructor Adam Strange.
Now you boys put those guns down.
Say what?
Whoa, we're not just gonna let you walk out of here.
Who's we, sucker?
Smith and Wesson and me.
And we're not going to let you walk out of Armed Alabama tonight. This is NRA instructor and retired circuit judge Rusty Johnston. Adam Strange is out of town on business, and I've got the show tonight. So I'm afraid you're going to have to be listening to me the whole evening. I spoke at an insurance convention a few years ago in Florida and was dubbed the wittiest judge in America, if you can believe that. So hold on for the night show. We've got a special guest coming I'll tell you about in a minute. This is the show where we talk about pistols, revolvers, rifles, shotguns, ammunition, concealed carry, personal defense training, and attacks on our God-given right to protect ourselves and our families. Now, folks, we are one advertiser short of making our 1-hour show 2 hours, but we need one more person who is in the type business that we appeal to. We could take anybody we wanted, but if you're in the gun refinishing business, the gunsmith business, something that would help you, contact us on our website or contact me. It's thejudge@armedalabama.com, or just go to the website. The rates may surprise you because they are surprisingly affordable. Now, we're having our first self-defense level 1 class. That'll be on April 9th, which is a Saturday. And it will be over at Three Brothers Gun Range. That's in Stapleton. And think Stapleton, it's 35 minutes from my house, and I live in Spring Hill. Go to the website for the complete information. But basically, if you're out in, let's say, the Spring Hill area, you get on I-65 North, go to Bay Minette, exit at Highway 59, go south 7 miles, and you're there. That's an all-day class. For beginners to advance, because we teach you how to survive a gunfight. This isn't Olympic pistol shooting. This is how to survive a gunfight and defend yourself, and I'm afraid a very dangerous area that we live in. Now, if you think you've tuned in to NPR's All Things Considered, you're on the wrong channel. I think that show closed down when Pravda did anyway. Now, at 30 minutes past the hour, we're going to take your calls and text here at FM Talk 106.5 at 251-343-0106. That's 251-343-0106. Now, tonight we have calling in a special guest, author and historian Dr. Brion McClanahan. He's written 5 books, mostly about the founders and the early Constitution. And he's like me. We consider ourselves maybe Jeffersonians. And I say early Constitution because the Constitution that we read now is certainly not the Constitution that the Supreme Court tells us it is. And we're going to explore how we got the right to keep and bear arms and how it's changed over the years. But first, let's look at our website poll from last week. We asked, what is your favorite handgun caliber for self-defense? 9mm was the favorite with 43%, 45 ACP, which means automatic Colt pistol, by the way, 30%, 380, 13%, and 4% for 40 caliber, 4% for 38 special, 4% for 32, and 4% for, that's it. All right. This week's poll, go to armedalabama.com, and we have another poll up. It is in an end-of-the-world scenario. That's super flu, zombie attack, comet hitting the Earth, whatever it be. What would be the only gun if you could choose one gun? Ruger 1022 rifle, which is a 22, The Colt AR-15, that's the civilian version, not the full auto, which is a 223 or 5.56. AK-47, which shoots the Russian 7.62 by 39 round. A Marlin 336, 30-30. Had to put that in. Didn't want to be accused of being anti-Western. Armalite AR-10, which shoots the 308 round. M1 Garand for you World War II fans, which shoots a 30-06. Mossberg 500 pump shotgun, 12 gauge. Or the Kel-Tec KSG 12 gauge, which I think holds 15 or 20 rounds. Or the Remington 1100, the first gun I ever owned at age 12 or 14. Got it from Sears Roebuck. Now remember, we'll take calls at 343-0106, 343-0106. Now we want to try to keep on the subject matter, Second Amendment, but that's broader than it would imply, because as we're going to explain, our rights really didn't come from the Second Amendment. After we take a number of calls, our screener is going to put the calls up on the board, and we're going to try to answer them. If we don't get to them, we're going to post them on our board in the next couple of days at armedalabama.com. We'll answer your questions. But as I say on that subject, not what's the best AR-15 to buy. Now, speaking of guns and accessories, I'm fortunate to have a great store down the street from me that sells not only firearms, but hunting supplies, scopes, cleaning supplies for guns, and probably the largest selection of running shoes in the area. But it's like if you were living here in the 1960s, you would remember K&B Drugs down on Spring Hill Avenue Extension. That's where McCoy's Outdoor is. They have everything you need if you're into sporting. One thing they have in particular that I demonstrate during our self-defense class is the Mace pepper spray gun. That is a gun that kind of looks like a flare gun, but you put a canister of pepper spray in it, and it will shoot 20 feet. And you've probably got 8 to 10 3-second bursts in that gun. You know, children obviously can't carry guns, and some people just are not prepared to carry a gun, and there's some places where you can't carry a gun. They sell that. They may be the only store in town that does. I had recommended buying it off the internet. So go down to McCoy's, check them out. Your daughter, take her down there. They have lots of clothes and accessories for her. But be prepared if you take her to take your credit card with you. Now, I want to mention one thing, one of our myths that we keep going through. Bulletproof vests are not bulletproof. They're bullet resistant, and they're rated to different specifications and levels. They're not magic. I have one. They're hot. They're heavy. And if shot, the wearer may break a rib, but survive. Civilians can own bullet-resistant vests in most states, and they may be something that you want to consider for your safe room. But remember, in the climate we're in, that wouldn't be my necessary first choice if I were stocking my safe room. As I say, they're hot and they're heavy, and that's why police officers, most of them, have got to be kind of coaxed into wearing them. You've got to look at the risk versus reward. Another hint I'll give you, if you have a semi-automatic pistol and you have problems with it jamming, misfeeding, etc., try a new magazine for it, because most of the time it's a magazine problem. And when you buy a new semi-automatic pistol, go ahead and buy, they usually come with 1 or 2 magazines. You need to buy 5 or 6 magazines. They'll be expensive because in 10 years they may not make that magazine anymore. So you need to stock up on those. And I don't want to be too critical here. Stay away from a brand called ProMag. They sell them everywhere, but I think I may have the only one in the world that works. They just tend not to work. So any other brand, the name brand, but stay away from the ProMags. Now, we'll have our guest calling in a minute or two, hopefully, Dr. Brion McClanahan, and we'll talk about our gun rights and why they're so precious to us and why we need to know about them and protect them. We're going to be stepping into a break and be back in a few minutes.
Longleaf pine is the South's original pine tree, towering over all others. Vast clear-cutting logging operations in the first half of the last century destroyed these beautiful longleaf forests, some well over 100 years old. Their wood sent to New England, New York, and Europe. Many Southerners have no memory of the magnificent longleaf forests that covered the South. The America's Longleaf Restoration Initiative is a concerted effort to restore and conserve longleaf pine forests. The best part is, it's working. For more info, visit americaslongleaf.org. When buying a vehicle, don't waste your valuable time. David Parnell at Palmer's Toyota is committed to getting you the best deal on a new, used, or leased car. And David will do that without wasting your time. Don't play the back and forth game. See David Parnell today. Palmer's Toyota, 470 Schillinger Road South. That's David Parnell at Palmer's Toyota, 639-0800, extension 168. Don't forget to see David Parnell at Palmer's Toyota, Schillinger Road, just south of Airport. He won't waste your time. If your spine is in a bind, it's time to be aligned. For 20 years, Dr. Justin Foster has been diagnosing and taking care of spinal problems. Misaligned vertebrae can hurt due to a strain or sprain from an accident, or be injured by repeated use and can lead to a pinched nerve if not fixed. Pinched nerves can cause a series of discomforts, including decreased flexibility, headaches, muscle, joint, disc, and nerve pain. Foster Chiropractic of Tillman's Corner, easy to find across from Lowe's off Rangeline.
Step up to the firing line. Armed Alabama is back. Questions, comments, and texts at 343-0106.
You see, in this world, there's two kinds of people, my friend. Those with loaded guns, and those who dig. You dig. Win.
All right, this is Judge Rusty Johnston back for Armed Alabama, and I am pleased to have as our guest today Dr. Brion McClanahan. He is the author of a great new book that's out that we're going to be giving away in a moment called 9 Presidents Who Screwed Up America and 4 Who Tried to Save Her. But he's also a historian, a teacher, and a PhD who's written 5 books, including The Politically Incorrect Guide to the Founding Fathers, The Founding Fathers' Guide to the Constitution, and The Politically Incorrect Guide to the 2 Real American Heroes. He holds an MA and a PhD in American History from the University of South Carolina, born in Virginia. He received his BA in History from Salisbury University in Maryland, and I know that he was one of the last doctoral students that Dr. Clyde Wilson had. And Dr. Wilson, if you don't know, a great scholar of John C. Calhoun and did a lot of work on some other Southern patriots. And Brion, how are you doing tonight?
I'm doing great. Thanks for having me on the show, Rusty. Appreciate it.
Brion, one of the things that I want to talk about is the origin of our right to bear arms. Most people think it comes from the Second Amendment. And as you and I know, of course, the Second Amendment had nothing to do with citizens of the various states until the McDonald case. Time's probably gotten away from me, 2009, 10, whenever it was. Right. Before that, it was our state constitutions that protected our right to keep and bear arms. Do you want to go into that for a moment?
Oh, absolutely right. You know, this whole idea of my brother is when he lived in Iowa, was a major proponent of the Second Amendment in Iowa, and I kept telling him, look, you need to work through your state constitution. Of course, Iowa does not have a protection for firearms in the Iowa state constitution. And that was always our first line of defense. So the Second Amendment was only applied to the general government, which is there in Washington, D.C. The states all had essentially Second Amendment provisions in them, or they didn't. And in the case of Alabama, our first protection is in the state of Alabama. And there were many states that regulated firearms in ways that, if you're a gun rights advocate, would not be something we would like. But that was completely up to the states. The whole idea of the Second Amendment was actually to correspond with Article 1, Section 8, that said that the general government could arm the militia And so in that case, there was a fear that, well, if they can arm the militia, they can disarm the militia. So that's why you have the Second Amendment. That only applied to federal firearms regulation, not to the states. So this whole concept that we need to somehow, always follow the Second Amendment, we need to look at Alabama or Florida or Georgia or Mississippi or, if you're listening in the north somewhere, you need to follow those constitutions because the state constitution, because that's your first line of defense, and it should always be your first line of defense. We have this very misguided view of how the federal constitution is supposed to work, and unfortunately that works to our detriment often at times rather than to our benefit.
I think it does. And Alabama's provision regarding arms is almost the same as the original 13 colonies. I think it says each citizen has a right to bear arms in defense of himself and the state, which, all the early colonies had. And I like the wording of that better, obviously, than the Second Amendment.
Right.
But what was it? John Paul Stevens or one of the justices who retired suggested amending the Second Amendment. And, my opinion is it wouldn't matter if they eliminated the Second Amendment. It's becomes one of those unenumerated rights that Justice Bork said he couldn't quite figure out what they were. But it's obviously an unenumerated right because it's existed, well, certainly to the English Bill of Rights, but you can find it in Rome. You can find it the whole way back. Exactly
right. In case of Rome, you had in all these ancient civilizations, arms-bearing citizens was the key when you looked at their legislature. You had to be an arms-bearing citizen. So whether it was Rome or Sparta, you go into Athens. I mean, you had these provisions in those constitutions or that political society where you had to be an arms-bearing citizen to be considered a person who could serve in the legislature. So this is not something that comes, people say, well, this is my Second Amendment right. No, it's really not. I mean, this is a right as a free citizen to defend yourself, and it's not just for hunting. And I think that's something that, the other side often says, well, what do you need a quote-unquote assault rifle for if you're going to go out hunting? Well, I mean, that's not even a question. You have a right to defend yourself and your family and, of course, your society, your community, and that's where the Second Amendment comes in. And, of course, that's where the idea comes in the State Bill of Rights. So this whole argument essentially comes down to what you believe about firearms, and that's about it. I mean, so the other side uses these convoluted arguments against our side, when in reality, this is something that shouldn't even be on the table. And usually it's not when someone gets threatened at some point. They very quickly come around to a pro-gun rights stance when their own life is on the line. And ultimately, if you look at John Locke in Two Treatises of Government, you have the right to, with your arms, replace the government if it becomes so tyrannical. And arms are necessary. That's exactly right. And, of course, Jefferson said the exact same thing in the Declaration of Independence. You have a right and a duty to alter or abolish that government. And, of course, that could come down to force if necessary. Of course, nobody wanted that. And one of the great things about the English Bill of Rights, it was called the Glorious Revolution because there was really no bloodshed at all.
Right.
So it's always the option is there, but you always want to go through all peaceful options before and exhaust all of those before you go to any other type of option. But I think that when we're looking at this issue, incorporation works against us, and I know we're going to get into that today. So I always caution Second Amendment people: look, you need to pay attention because if the which the Supreme Court can give you, it can take away as well, and we've seen that all throughout history with the Supreme Court. It's not something that you should put your full faith into because you can always be disappointed by that.
Well, I made the point the other day that we shouldn't be worried about who's going to be appointed to the Supreme Court next. They shouldn't have that kind of power. That's the problem.
Right.
Folks, what incorporation is the Supreme Court, through, frankly, legal trickery, has taken almost each one of the Bill of Rights, and they have applied them to the states. If you'll notice, the First Amendment says Congress shall make no law. They were only meant to apply to the federal government and never to the states. If you know this, when the Bill of Rights was enacted, most of the states had official state churches, and some of those continued right to the Civil War almost. I think Massachusetts was still taxing people for their state church, which would be kind of typical. But these incorporations, they started incorporating these against the states, and some people would be surprised that the Establishment Clause, I think, was not incorporated until 1947, and the Free Exercise Clause until 1940, And this is really all development. I almost said this century, but I guess it's last now. This is all a recent development, and it's really wrong. It was not meant to be that way. You're the historian. Tell us why you think, other than just growing federalism, growing central authority, why did that happen?
Well, let me go back a little bit about the Bill of Rights. There's two things that people need to remember about the Bill of Rights. One, there actually was a preamble to the Bill of Rights, which very plainly said that these were restrictive clauses on misconstruction by the general government. So it was clear that the Bill of Rights were intended only to apply to the general government and not anywhere else. And in fact, Madison proposed an incorporation amendment, and it was rejected unanimously by the founding generation. If anyone thought that these amendments applied to the states, they never would have been ratified. As you mentioned, the state established churches. There are other things. The states handled everything but that was enumerated in Article 1, Section 8. And so the idea was to restrict the power of the general government. Now, if you look at where all this came from, I can point right to the very first Congress in the first Judiciary Act of 1789, and they established a federal court system. And one of the things they did was allow for state decisions to be, or actually for issues between citizens and the state to be appealed right to the federal court system. And if you look at the ratifying debates, that was something that people were very afraid of. In fact, this was mentioned over and over again. They believed that the central government could destroy the state courts. And again, if that had ever been put on the table, the Constitution never would have been ratified.
Well, so that's what Madison. People would be surprised what Madison proposed when he got to the federal convention. He wanted to his Virginia plan, the first one, proposed a veto of state laws by the Congress. I think it proposed a joint presidential and judicial task force to determine whether acts of Congress were constitutional. He proposed some kind of wacky things.
Yeah, well, that was what John Dickinson said. Look, wait a second here. Experience has to be our only guide. Reason may mislead us. He was not interested in what they called innovation. These were all innovations. They didn't want to see the states. What you really had in Philadelphia were those who wanted a real federal government, a federal union of states, and those who wanted a national government like Madison. They wanted to destroy the states. And Madison wanted to do it because he hated Patrick Henry. So Patrick Henry had too much power in Virginia, and Patrick Henry hated James Madison, and so he was trying to limit people like Patrick Henry or John Hancock in Massachusetts. They thought they were a real problem. And so what you had, this whole idea of a nationalist framework was defeated soundly in Philadelphia. So when Madison left Philadelphia in September of 1787 and began defending the Constitution, he started defending the Constitution that was actually written down and then later ratified, which was completely different than the one he wanted in Philadelphia. He was a nationalist. He wanted to make Virginia essentially disappear and have a national government that, as you said, had a state veto, supreme law of the land, where no state, the states really had very little power at all. And, of course, all that was rejected. So we have a situation now where the central authority does have all the power, and essentially even private property. You don't own private property anymore. The government can tell you what to do with your private property in almost any way they see fit. So it's not really private property anymore. It's you hold the property at the pleasure of the government. So we've gone way away from what the founding generation originally wanted.
It's really amazing. It's amazing. During the Depression, the contracts clause in the Constitution was just eliminated because they didn't want homes and farms to be foreclosed on. They just it's in the main body of the Constitution. It's just been eliminated. It's really incredible. We got to go to break in a minute. I'll leave us before the break with these words, surprisingly, from the Supreme Court. The ultimate touchstone of of constitutionality is the Constitution itself, and not what we have said about it. Graves versus O'Keefe. We'll be back with Armed Alabama in 2 or 3 minutes. Hang on, Brian.
Way of life, our fighting men have fought and died to keep. If you don't love it, leave it. Let this song that I'm singing be a warning when you're running down.
FM Talk 106.5, the Gulf Coast Weather Authority, and Dr. Bill Williams.
We'll look for mostly cloudy skies tonight. Low temperatures will be around 60 degrees at daybreak. For Wednesday, mostly cloudy with a few showers and thunderstorms. Highs in the lower 70s. And the outlook for Thursday, cloudy with showers and thunderstorms and high temperatures in the upper 70s. This is meteorologist Dr. Bill Williams for FM Talk 106.5.
FM Talk 106.5, the Gulf Coast Weather Authority.
From Fox 10 News, I'm Renee Slagan from Talk 106.5. The metropolitan area of Huntsville leading Alabama's population growth last year. According to reports, Huntsville added more than 4,000 people over a one-year span, the most in the state. That pushed the city to just under 445,000 residents. And the data also shows Baldwin County added almost as many residents as Huntsville with 3,996. That marked a 2% growth in the one-year span, the fastest rate of growth in the state. A judge has postponed House Speaker Mike Hubbard's ethics trial that had been scheduled to start next month. Lee County Circuit Judge Jacob Walker on Monday agreed to delay the trial while the prosecutor recovers from a knee surgery. Walker says he will issue an order later setting the new trial date. Lastly, model Janice Dickinson calling it a victory against Bill Cosby. A judge rules Dickinson's defamation case against the comedian can proceed. Dickinson sued Cosby for defamation after his legal team denied her allegations that he drugged and raped her in 1982. From Talk 106.5, Lisa Gunn, Fox 10 News.
Looking for land, commercial space, or a home to purchase? Or do you have real estate that you would like to sell? Then you need to talk with Mamoon Siddique at RE/MAX Partners, 7221 Grelot Road, Suite B. Mamoon is dedicated to providing his clients trustworthy real estate expertise and professional, dependable service. Whether buying or selling your primary residence or a second home, or relocating to a new neighborhood, Mamoon can help make your home ownership dreams come true. Email Mamoon at remax.net. That's MAMUN at remax.net. When buying a vehicle, don't waste your valuable time. David Parnell at Palmer's Toyota is committed to getting you the best deal on a new, used, or leased car. And David will do that without wasting your time. Don't play the back and forth game. See David Parnell today. Palmer's Toyota, 470 Schillinger Road South. That's David Parnell at Palmer's Toyota, 639-0800, extension 168. Don't forget to see David Parnell at Palmer's Toyota, Schillinger Road, just south of Airport. He won't waste your time.
Step up to the firing line. Armed Alabama is back. Questions, comments, and texts at 343-0106.
If you don't love it, leave it. Let this song that I'm singing be a warning. When you're running down our country, man, you're walking on the fighting side of me.
Does that remind you all of all the hippies out protesting the Vietnam War and the great silent majority? It does me. I have with me Dr. Brion McClanahan, and he is the author of a new book, 9 Presidents Who Screwed Up America and 4 Who Tried to Save Her. And Brion, I want to mention this before we take a few calls. You are also a teacher on Tom Wood's Liberty Classroom. And if you want to learn the Constitution, for God's sakes, don't go to law school. Go to Liberty Classroom and look at rolling that. And it's very inexpensive. I think you can usually get it for $100. But take some of your classes by video and some of Kevin Gutzman's classes by video. And that's how you'll learn the Constitution. You won't do it in law school. You'll start with the 14th Amendment in law school, believe me. And also, we're going to have some links up to your books on armedalabama.com. But if you'd like a autographed copy, the ones that he has in stock, go to Brion McClanahan. Is that your site? BrionMcClanahan.com. www.Brion, Brion. Well, go. I know how to spell it. Nobody's going to remember it. We have the link on our website, and he can take care of you there. Brion, one other thing I want to mention before we go to a couple of calls is your book. You have emphasized the presidents who have taken their oath of office seriously, as opposed to the presidents, and I'll name one, Woodrow Wilson, who have not taken their oath seriously and who have completely violated it. Of course, the current president has, but maybe stay away from that. Tell us about that, because the normal historians, who are usually liberal, they'll rank the people who take their oath seriously near the bottom, and the real dynamic presidents who violate their oath, they'll put them at the top.
Right, and that's the exact opposite way we should rank the presidents. I mean, look, we have one of the few things that the executive branch has in the Constitution, Article 2. There is an oath, and your oath is to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution. Now, what does that exactly mean? Well, of course, the president was designed to execute the laws of Congress, but only the constitutional laws, and of course, they have a veto power. But as George Washington said, the president should only veto legislation that's unconstitutional. Now, we know that they don't do that anymore. They don't even care. In fact, the president was never designed to be chief legislator, which bring up Woodrow Wilson. Wilson considered himself to be a prime minister. He wanted to get down to the trenches of Congress and write legislation and craft, different bills. And of course, no way did the founders ever think that should be possible. Even Alexander Hamilton argued against that in Federalist 69. So what we have now is a presidency that the founding generation would only recognize because they had a king that would do the exact same thing, and maybe even less than what less power than our current president has. So I looked at the presidency the exact opposite way. Who actually defended the Constitution, the original Constitution, the one we're talking about? And the man who did that best was John Tyler, a person that nobody really knows anything about. But he actually wrote that in his veto messages. This is my job. I have to preserve, protect, and defend the Constitution, so I'm going to veto this unconstitutional legislation. And, of course, that's how we should be looking at these people, and we should hold those people in very high esteem. We normally don't, though, as you said.
As I sent you, Monroe vetoed the Cumberland Gap bill on internal improvements, even though he wanted internal improvements, and wrote a 60-something, of course I blew the letters up, 60-something page veto message that explained in detail why it was unconstitutional. Nobody would consider that today. Nobody.
No. And, there's actually, Calvin Coolidge did that in the 1920s when he vetoed a farm bill. They actually had a veto message that was very detailed in why that bill violated the Commerce Clause and how they were expanding this Commerce Clause unconstitutionally, so they vetoed it. You would never find that nowadays. I mean, that's really one of the last times I can think of that you actually had a real sound constitutional defense of a veto. Now, Nixon and others would say, well, I veto, for example, the War Powers Resolution because it's unconstitutional. But he was saying it was unconstitutional because they were restricting the power of the executive branch in a way that he didn't like. So it wasn't really unconstitutional. I could argue that bill was unconstitutional for other reasons. But, Nixon was just throwing this out there. Normally, presidents don't do that anymore. So it's really refreshing to look at people, as you said, Monroe. There are so many, there are so few, actually, but, I mean, there are others who would do this, but usually you find them in the first half of the 19th century and then a few afterwards, but it really petered out after Abraham Lincoln.
Let me answer a text message we have here because it's pretty interesting. Legal pistol carrier said that he's dating a woman who had a felony on her record. She has a felony on her record, he says had, and he is wondering if she'd get in trouble for being with him while he's carrying. I would say yes. Normally, if a felon has access to a firearm, like if they're living in the same house with a firearm, that's considered they have access to the firearm, and that's under the federal law. They're in jeopardy. Oftentimes they are if they're just rounds of ammunition in there. So I would either get rid of her or get rid of the gun, and personally I'd keep the gun. But that's up to you. A lot of women out there, not a lot of good guns. One of the things Woodrow Wilson did that is just abominable is the Espionage Act and some of the laws. People don't realize people were prosecuted for just saying, I don't think that, for advocating repeal of the Conscription Act, which Daniel Webster said was totally outrageous and not allowed under the Constitution.
Yeah. I mean, Wilson is a complete disaster. And if you look at, I could say there's some turning points before that. But in the 20th century, Woodrow Wilson set the blueprint for what everyone else did after it. Franklin Roosevelt, during World War II, did a whole lot of unconstitutional things, of course, also during the New Deal. But he had Wilson as his guide because during World War I, as you mentioned, there was the Espionage Act, the Sedition Act. You had all this legislation come through Congress that centralized the economy, whether it was nationalizing the railroads, creating production boards, consumption boards, all this stuff. That what they were doing was trying to make sure that they controlled what people produced, how much they paid for it, what they ate, how they could buy things. I mean, this is completely unconstitutional. I know you read Article 1, Section 8. I read Article 1, Section 8. There's nothing in that part of the Constitution that allows the Congress to do this. and certainly nothing in the Constitution that says the executive branch can do any of this stuff. So Wilson was doing things that nobody had ever done before, and we have a great big mess now in Washington, D.C.
But Wilson screened, it was first screening of Birth of a Nation in the White House.
Right. And you know, a lot of people don't realize that about Wilson either. You know, so he was, in some ways, you know, Wilson was really a nice example of progressivism in a different kind of way. Wilson was the bridge. You know, he was born in the South, but he was, you know, president of Princeton University, so he was kind of this bridge between the North and the South. And during that time period, you had a lot of reconciliation going on. And so you had Northern progressives that realized that Southern progressives were just like them, and so they got together and created this great big monster of progressivism that has ruined America for the last 100 years. And, you know, Wilson was that guy that thought intellectuals should be running the show, and he really put progressivism on the map. You could say Teddy Roosevelt was doing a lot of the same things, but Wilson was really the best example we've had of someone who was able to bridge these things, put them together, and you had this great big monsters. Many had Hydra.
Eugenics was under it. It's really amazing. What do you say we take a call? Art, let's put one through. I think they've got the lines jammed up. We'll take some calls if you're on subject. Now you gotta love what we're talking about here, and we're going to give a book away to someone that knows the answer to this question: who primarily drafted the Declaration of Independence? That means our Declaration of Independence. There are lots of them out there, but if you know the answer to that question, you're going to win 9 presidents who screwed up America and 4 who tried to save her. And I'll give you a hint. There are actually a few more than that in there, aren't there, Brian?
Right. Yeah. You could have there was 5 people that you could say, but let's go with the primary author.
Yeah, exactly. I think we have Fred. Is that Fred online too? Fred.
Yes, sir.
All right. Who primarily drafted the Declaration of Independence?
I'm sorry. Who primarily drafted the what?
The Declaration of Independence.
Thomas Jefferson.
You got it. And you've got 9 presidents who screwed up America by Brion McClanahan. And we'll put you on hold and get your phone number. All you need to do is come by the studio tomorrow or any day thereafter. Don't wait too long. They may swipe it around here, all right? You have anything else to add, Fred?
Well, I'm just curious why nobody's addressing these chemtrail issues.
Well, I tell you, the chemtrails, I've gotten vaccinated against them, and I know Brian has too, but they're an issue that we're going to...
Wait. You said you got vaccinated
well,
against them? How
you got to
do
be part of a test group, clinical trial.
Are you kidding me?
Well, maybe I've said too much. We're going to have a future. We're going to have a future show on it.
No, I'm glad you said that. I didn't know that there was a.
You got to stay on the internet and go to the government clinical trial section, and you got to keep looking, and it'll pop up occasionally. We're going to have a show on it in the future. Just stay tuned.
What about the vaccinations? I mean, come on, this shit they did down in Mexico,
I know.
Test clinical trial, and the shit that they're fucking spraying all over Australia now.
You got to take that risk. You got to take that risk. We'll get back to it, Fred. Keep listening, all right? All right, we have Greg, I'm sorry, next line.
Hello?
Hey, Greg.
Yeah. Is this Rusty?
It sure is.
Okay, Greg Walker here.
Hey, Greg.
I was down in the old law library down close to the old tunnel years ago, and I ran across a section in the Alabama Code that said that every able-bodied male in the state of Alabama over 16 years old was automatically a member of the unorganized militia. And I was wondering who would call that militia kind of to order if it was ever needed, and do other states have such provisions, and is any of that active nowadays?
Well, fortunately, Fred, I think, Greg, I think it cuts it off at 45, guys. I looked at that recently. But the governor can call out the unorganized militia. Basically, they've gutted that with the National Guard Act.
Yeah.
But it's still on the books, and in theory, it could be called out in the event of any kind of disturbance. But The idea of it was to have a citizens militia that could be called up in the event of invasion, civil insurrection, whatever. But it's still on the books, yeah.
It seems that those kind of community groups and things like that are kind of frowned upon these days.
Well, they are. We got to go to break, Fred, but thank you for calling, and you're very observant to pick that up. I think they ought to be activated again. That's what we need. All right, we're going to have to step into a break, and we'll be back in 2 or 3 minutes with Armed Alabama.
Longleaf pine is the South's original pine tree, towering over all others. Vast clear-cutting logging operations in the first half of the last century destroyed these beautiful longleaf forests, some well over 100 years old. Their wood sent to New England, New York, and Europe. Many Southerners have no memory of the magnificent longleaf forests that covered the South. The America's Longleaf Restoration Initiative is a concerted effort to restore and conserve longleaf pine forests. The best part is, it's working. For more info, visit americaslongleaf.org. If your spine is in a bind, it's time to be aligned. For 20 years, Dr. Justin Foster has been diagnosing and taking care of spinal problems. Misaligned vertebrae can hurt due to a strain or sprain from an accident, or be injured by repeated use and can lead to a pinched nerve if not fixed. Pinched nerves can cause a series of discomforts, including decreased flexibility, headaches, muscle, joint, disc, and nerve pain. Foster Chiropractic of Tillman's Corner, easy to find across from Lowe's off Rangeline.
Step up to the firing line. Armed Alabama is back. Questions, comments, and texts at 343-0106.
Now remember, things look bad, and it looks like you're not gonna make it, then you gotta get mean. I mean plumb mad dog mean. Because if you lose your head and you give up, then you neither live nor win. That's just the way it is.
This is Judge Rusty Johnston, and we're back with Armed Alabama. Want to remind everybody about our self-defense class on April 9th. Go to our website and sign up for that. It's $99 plus I believe, $15 range fee. It's all day. You will learn how to survive on the streets. Brian, I've got our Constitution, Alabama's Constitution here, which is much stronger than the federal Constitution on freedom of religion. It has, I think, 4 clauses regarding religion. It makes every effort to point out you can't be taxed, you can't be forced to go to a church, the state can't adopt a official religion, and that's the way it was supposed to be. If Massachusetts wanted to have the Congregational Church as their state religion, fine. If Alabama didn't, fine. That's the way the country was supposed to be set up, not as some big national organization. And we've just let the, momentum of the central government destroy what we had originally.
Well, that's exactly right. I mean, the whole idea that, somehow this freedom of religion, that's the only thing we have to look to is the First Amendment. It's ridiculous. And as you said, the Alabama Constitution is much stronger, and a lot of your state constitutions are. And in fact, that was supposed to be left up to the states entirely. The only thing, the general government couldn't have you wouldn't have to tie it to a church of the United States or have a church of the United States, but otherwise the states could do this entirely. And so I think this is part of the perspective. After the Civil War was over in 1865, you had everyone looking to the national, quote unquote, national government for everything. Whether it was, you take your pick of an issue, they wanted the central government to be able to handle these issues. And so this is what we've gotten at. This is the mess we're in. What Massachusetts does affects what Alabama does, and it shouldn't be that way. It should be Alabamians can take care of their own business and do what Alabamians want to do, and who cares what they do in California or Massachusetts. It's really amazing how we've gone from a federal republic of states to a national government that has one-size-fits-all policies for everyone, and that creates all the political problems we have today.
Right. Fred, we need you to call back and get your information about winning the book. yes, you were right. It's Thomas Jefferson. Had a little help from some others, but Thomas Jefferson primarily drafted the Declaration of Independence. And need to call back so we can get your full name and your telephone number, just so we can keep somebody else from coming by and claiming they won the book. Brian, let me ask you this. Throughout John Locke, he used the terms frequently, life, liberty, and the pursuit of property. Why did Jefferson change that? It seems flippant to put happiness in there.
Well, they actually took that from George Mason. If you look at Virginia's Declaration of Rights, which was drafted by George Mason when they drafted their first constitution, you see that Mason said that, government has an obligation to protect life, liberty, and property, which means happiness, right? We're in the pursuit of happiness. So Jefferson just dropped property and put happiness in there. And so when he was asked about this, he said, look, I was just expressing the American mind. Same thing with all men are created equal. It wasn't anything new. He was just expressing what people thought at the time. So everyone understood that happiness meant property because he had lifted that right from Virginia's Declaration of Rights. And so it wasn't really a big deal. We've taken this way out of context now and from what Jefferson really intended it to mean, which is what everyone's done with the Declaration. So it's not surprising that that particular phrase has been manipulated as it has.
Yeah, one of the reasons I ask is, a major tenet in the self-defense law is you can't use deadly force to protect property. And I would suspect that 200 years ago, that was not their opinion at all.
No, I mean, that would have been a given, right?
Right.
It's your property. So if somebody's trying to take it from you or threatening your person or your family for injury in whatever case, you have a right to protect that property. And so this is, it's preposterous today that we have a situation, as I said, where your property isn't really your own. The government decides how you can protect it, how you can use it, who you can let on it, who you can't let on it. I mean, these are things that we don't really have private property anymore. We have property that we're using at the behest of the government, and they're under their guide. So it's just amazing how far we've come in 200 years.
I've always been interested in this, in Article 3, Section 3, treason. And, of course, we all know that John Brown was tried by the state of Virginia for treason, not by the United States. Treason against the United States shall consist only in levying war against them, or in adhering to their enemies, giving them aid and comfort. Them, the individual states. And that's what they considered before the war between the states is these United States. It was the compact between the however many states there were at the time. But after the war, it was more of the national country. Is that kind of your interpretation?
Absolutely. I think you could make a very clear case that Abraham Lincoln was actually committing treason and invading the South.
Well, that's where I was leading you.
Right. If you follow his constitutional logic that the states weren't out of the Union, that secession didn't really happen. He had so many constitutional problems with that war, but if the states weren't really out of the Union, then he would have had to have permission from the legislature or the governor of the seceding states or the state in quote-unquote rebellion to send in the army, and he didn't have that. So he would actually be committing treason against those states because he did not have authorization from those states to send in the army. So Lincoln was a much more clear case of treason than the southern states themselves, who would say, well, look, we're just trying to defend ourselves from the general government. So, and he didn't have a declaration of war. If they're out of the Union, then he had to have a declaration of war, which he did not have. So that war was a mess constitutionally, and Lincoln could never really reconcile it, neither could the Congress, which is why it's just kind of, well, it is what it is, and they just did it anyways.
Let's take another call from Jack. Jack, you're on the air.
Hey, what's going on?
Not much.
I'm just curious why we still have a college electorate. Why one vote doesn't count for a vote.
I'm going to let Brian answer it, but in my opinion, if we didn't have it, the presidential candidates would never show up in Alabama. They would be in all California and all the urban centers. But, Brian, there's probably a better reason.
Well, I mean, why the Electoral College, I think, is very clear because it keeps the states in the loop. You still have states matter, and in this case, you have to win states. The states are supposed to elect the president, not the people directly. It was never intended to be that way.
I can barely hear you.
In fact,
I'm sorry.
They didn't count the popular vote till 1824. So the founding generation didn't care about the popular vote because they worried about popular democracy and demagoguery and all the things that can come out of that. We've seen very clearly that Obama was able to do that very well. just appeal to the people, and if you can get elected. So you can, if you promise everybody everything under the sun, they're going to vote for you. So this is why I think that not having a popularly elected president is a very good idea.
All right, so why did Kasich, the first digital vote, and he won, and he shouldn't have won? Tell me that.
Well, let me mention digital voting, and that's nonsense. I've studied that. Of course, I was involved, as Brian knows, in a big election dispute here, the Hooper case. Nobody should be internet voting and any of that. The military studied that 15 years ago and found more holes in it than a horse trader's mule.
Well,
so
of course.
Stay away from that.
And the vote got counted in the UK.
Yeah, there you go. I'm surprised it wasn't India. Got to move on, but we need to keep it, and we need to go back to senators being elected by the legislature. That's why Stephen Douglas beat Abraham Lincoln. People don't realize that. The legislature elected the senators, not the people that were out there speaking. Brian, any closing thoughts for us?
No, other than that, what people really need to understand is that, as you said, the 17th Amendment is important. We need to bring the states back in this government. If we really want to change Washington, D.C., it's not going to happen by electing Donald Trump or anyone to a national office or anyone from Alabama. Really, it has to come back to the state legislatures and the state courts standing up to the federal government. That was the original Constitution. That was how the founders designed this federal republic. The states had all the power, not the general government. And I think if people start realizing that, some real change can happen. Otherwise, we're just going to keep following down the same path we are, which is a national government with national problems, and nothing's ever going to get any better.
And as we've talked about, it can be done. Most of the jurisdiction the Supreme Court has and the lower courts have has been given to it by Congress. Congress could, by bill tomorrow, abolish all of the lower courts and probably take away all the justices on the Supreme Court but 3. And they could do it tomorrow if they had the guts. They love to complain about the federal courts, what they've done, but they let them get away with it. All right, ladies and gentlemen, go to the website, armedalabama.com, vote on our poll. What is your favorite end-of-the-world gun? And remember, April 9th, we have our self-defense 1 class over at Three Brothers Shooting Range in Stapleton. And Brion McClanahan, we thank you very much. Look at his books. Go to our website, look at his list of books. He's a smart guy. And also go to Liberty Classroom if you want to learn about the Constitution and history of this country. Thank you again, Dr. McClanahan.
Thanks a lot. Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.
All right. We'll see you next week on Armed Alabama.
The rest of us can count on being free. They love our milk and honey, but they preach about some other way of living. And when they're running down our country, man, they're walking on the fighting side of me.
Looking for land, commercial space, or a home to purchase? Or do you have real estate that you would like to sell? Then you need to talk with Mamoon Siddique at RE/MAX Partners, 7221 Grelot Road, Suite